Thank you. And thank you for that introduction. And I'm super excited to be here with all of you. And as you said, today I'm going to be focusing on a recent cross-national analysis I did. So first I want to talk about world society theory. So world society theory finds in the environmental literature that there seems to be this disjuncture or decoupling between stated environmental objectives that nations say they're going to achieve, like, for instance, the Paris Agreement, to their actual environmental practices. So, for instance, you have countries signing on to these international environmental treaties, but then their environmental practices aren't matching that. And world society theorists often try to think about why this is the case. And so previous research finds that these shared environmental norms, usually measured through membership to international environmental non-governmental organizations, tends to have differential impacts on environmental factors. So some authors are finding that higher memberships to environmental international non-governmental organizations are associated with less forest loss, while some are finding that it's actually associated with more forest loss, and some are finding no association. And so I'm drawing on more state-centered perspectives, like the work of Peter Evans, to see if this decoupling between stated environmental norms and actual environmental outcomes like forest loss is the result of something like institutional capacity or something having to do with state governance. And so, put simply, my research question is decoupling between these environmental norms, right? These memberships to environmental, international, non-governmental organizations and the activities they are performing that are supposed to reduce things like forest loss, right? Because they engage in like social movement activities. They provide additional funding to nations to reduce forest loss and other activities. And so maybe this decoupling has something to do with external political influences, right, towards environmentally damaging activities to increase environmental growth, right? Maybe there's this pressure from the outside. And so maybe nations with stronger domestic autonomy, which I measure as the extent to which a nation is free from the direct control of external political actors. And so maybe nations that have more control can help improve the effectiveness of EINGOs at reducing forest loss. And bringing in some previous research to sort of like explain why this may be the case, this may be due to the state's ability to integrate their version of environmentalism or environmental efforts that would be beneficial to them, in some ways reinterpreting perhaps global or existing norms of environmentalism into their own activities. And just getting a little bit more into the theoretical reasoning. So EINGOs, which lots of research has shown how they often have top-down creation and maintenance, and this may not adequately address the particular environmental, social, political, or economic context of the multiple nations they work within. Put differently, if you have a large international environmental non-governmental organization, it might not cater all of its specific projects or activities to individual nations and their diverse needs or diverse environmental issues. And also, these large international environmental non-governmental organizations may be a bit beholden to the environmental norms and ideologies of their origin, which is usually based in high-income nations. So they might be, entrenched in narratives of global capitalism or face other constraints from being less familiar with environmental and cultural landscapes of the nations they're working within. And this could potentially make their efforts irrelevant, right? Which might help explain how folks are finding that there's no association between EINGOs and forest loss. or at worst counterproductive, which may explain why folks are finding that EINGOs are related to increased levels of forest loss, right? And so I'm arguing that maybe there's some sort of internal state capacity having to do with this, right? And so here's my speculation for this cross-national relationship, that host nations of EINGOs that have stronger political authority or more freedom of the direct control of external political actors, that they might be better able to integrate their own versions of environmentalism into EINGO activities compared to nations with less control. This is in part building off of recent work with myself and a few of my co-authors that are finding that there's an interaction between domestic non-governmental environmental organizations and international environmental non-governmental organizations, right? That there's something about the internal activity of the state. So to test this idea, I take a sample of 91 low and middle income nations, and I use something called ordinary least squares regression to test the association between EINGOs and forest loss, as well as domestic autonomy and forest loss. In particular, I use the dependent variable from the World Resources Institute. So what you see in front of you is a map that represents forest loss in the area I'm currently living and working in, right? And so you'll see the pink or the lighter sections represent forest loss, and the black represents no forest loss, and the gray is no data or water. And so these are really cool updated data, right? So they use high resolution satellite imagery. And compared to previous measures of forest loss, like from different sources that are sort of using outdated files, that are using survey reports, these are actually using satellite data. And so this is a really cool innovation. And so with the ordinary least squares regression, I'm interacting two key independent variables to see how their interaction impacts forest loss. And these two variables are, as I talked about before, domestic autonomy. And this measures from the varieties of democracy, which I'd love to talk more about if you're interested in those data, how they're collected, what they're actually measuring, how they can be compared to other measures of things like colonialism. And then I'm also measuring EINGOs, which represent the number of international environmental non-governmental organizations at least 3 of a nation's citizens are members of, right? And so it shows membership to these international organizations, this sort of connection. And I use, other models, and I like instrumental variable regression to deal with issues of endogeneity. And I also have a number of other controls and deal with a lot of other model assumptions. And so if you're interested in that, I'd love to go into it later. Okay, so what you see in front of you here is one of my abbreviated tables from my paper. And so this is the ordinary least squares regression estimates for forest loss. If you look down this column that starts with independent variables, you'll see the 2 main independent variables, domestic autonomy, EINGOs, and then the interaction between them. I also have other relevant controls in these models. I just didn't put them up here. And then if you go across, you'll see model 1. Model 1 only includes domestic autonomy and EINGOs. And model 2 includes both of these variables as well as the interaction term. That way I can estimate the impact of the interaction of these variables on forest loss. And so this first number represented is the unstandardized regression coefficient. The second is the standardized regression coefficient. And the third in parentheses is the robust standard error. I flag statistical significance using these little stars. Okay. So I want to first direct your attention to this red box. And the coefficients here that represent domestic autonomy failed to reach levels of statistical significance. Same as EINGOs, right? The coefficients that represent this variable fail to reach levels of statistical significance. Which I mean is consistent with some previous research, right? I was saying how some folks find that EINGOs are related to higher levels of forest loss, lower levels of forest loss, or no association. So now I want to direct your attention down here to the coefficients that represent the interaction term between domestic autonomy and EINGOs. And what I find here is that the coefficient is negative and statistically significant. This suggests that there is some sort of interaction effect happening. So here is a graph I'm presenting that represents the predicted effects of domestic autonomy on EINGOs on forest loss, right? And so what I'm finding here is that this bottom row, domestic autonomy times EINGOs, right? That there is this downward sloping line, and that the lines around the point estimates are statistically significant, right? They're not passing zero throughout. And overall, what this graph is telling me is that EINGOs seem to reduce forest loss, downward sloping line, more in nations with higher rather than lower levels of domestic autonomy. And so
In about 1 minute, Jamie.
thank you so much. And so I'll conclude with just a quick discussion and some conclusions. And so I started by saying how many researchers in the world society tradition are concerned with decoupling between a nation's stated values and their actual outcomes. There's a lot of previous research that has aimed to explain this disconnection by incorporating ideas from world systems and dependency theory perspectives. However, few studies consider the impact of the state on the relationship between environmental norms and values and environmental outcomes. And this is surprising because a lot of research has suggested that there are external pressures to comply with export-oriented and resources and like these resource-intensive activities and practices within global capitalism. And this it might help explain how there's this non-compliance to global environmental norms. And so I have a couple possible conclusions that I'd like to talk more with you all about. And but it seems like there's something about how these norms and values of environmentalism, right? They're simplified, they're framed, and they're reinterpreted by different international groups, and they're spread from a top-down process. And these ideologies might be inherently biased towards those interests of the international environmental non-governmental organizations. And so they might be disproportionately benefiting from the material and cultural advances of capitalism, which could be in opposition to what the host nations actually want to achieve. And so perhaps we can start looking at how these external factors can help shape these inconsistent findings in previous research. So I'm interested in any questions you have, and thank you.